I reported to Fort Benning for basic training 2 days after my 18th birthday. As the fourth generation of military men in my family, there was an unspoken expectation that I would excel just as they had. But from day one, I struggled while others seemed to naturally thrive. Our drill sergeant, Staff Sergeant Reynolds, took particular notice of my difficulties. During target practice, the other recruits hit their marks with reasonable accuracy, but my shots scattered wildly across the paper target. "Walker!" Staff Sergeant Reynolds called out, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears from the gunfire. What the hell was that? My grandmother could shoot better with her eyes closed. The other recruits snickered around me as I tried to maintain my composure. "Sir, I'll do better next time, sir," I said. "Next time? You think the enemy's gonna give you a next time?" He grabbed my target sheet and held it up for everyone to see. "This isn't shooting, Walker. This is embarrassing." And that was just the beginning. The next day, during a navigation exercise, I got completely lost in the training grounds. What should have been a 2-hour exercise turned into a 4-hour ordeal with search parties sent to find me. "Look who finally decided to join us," Staff Sergeant Reynolds announced when I was brought back to base camp. "Got yourself turned around again, Walker?" "Sir? Yes, sir," I replied, my legs sore and my uniform muddy from wandering through the woods. "I think we need a new name for you." He walked around me slowly, then stopped in front of me. "Boots, because you clearly don't know how to use them." He turned to the other recruits. "From now on, this one's Boots Walker." The nickname stuck immediately. By dinner that evening, no one called me James anymore. In the barracks that night, after everyone else had fallen asleep, I pulled out a photo I kept tucked inside my footlocker. 4 men in military uniforms stood side by side. My great-grandfather from World War I, my grandfather from World War II, my father from Desert Storm, and my brother Mark in his dress blues from his graduation. They all looked straight and serious, with medals pinned on their chests. All of them carried the Walker name with pride. I ran my finger over their faces in the dim light. This was who I was supposed to be. This was the legacy I was supposed to continue. But so far, all I'd managed to do was become the family joke. The weekend pass came as both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Going home meant escaping the constant drills and Staff Sergeant Reynolds' criticisms, but it also meant facing my father. Our house in Norfolk hadn't changed. The same naval memorabilia on the walls, the same polished wooden floors, the same cold and formal feeling everywhere. My father met me at the door with a firm handshake instead of a hug. "You've lost weight," he said, his eyes moving from my face to my boots. "The food's not great, sir," I said, falling back into the habit of addressing him formally. He nodded and led me into the house. My mother hugged me briefly before excusing herself to prepare dinner. In the living room, my father poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat in his leather armchair. "Mark called yesterday," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Top of his class in advanced tactical training. His CO says he's never seen anyone pick up the material so quickly." I nodded, not sure what response he wanted. "How's your training going?" he asked, though his tone suggested it was merely a formality. "It's challenging," I admitted, not wanting to lie, but also not wanting to disappoint him further. "I'm doing well in the survival course. Instructor said I have good instincts for resource management." My father nodded once, then changed the subject. "The Johnson boy down the street joined the Navy. His father says he's considering OCS." And that was it. My small win noted with a nod before being pushed aside. We spent the rest of the evening talking about naval strategy in the South China Sea, a topic my father knew I couldn't say much about. The next morning, the house was suddenly buzzing. Mark showed up without warning, dropping his duffel bag right in the entryway as he called out, "Anyone home for a hungry soldier?" The change in our parents was immediate. My mother rushed from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron before throwing her arms around Mark. My father actually smiled, a rare sight, as he patted Mark on the shoulder. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" my mother asked, already pulling him toward the kitchen with promises of his favorite breakfast. "Last-minute leave before deployment," Mark explained. "Couldn't pass up the chance to see my favorite family." Breakfast became a celebration. Mark entertained our parents with stories from his training, cleaned-up versions, I was sure, that left out the hard parts and focused on the good times. My father laughed more in that hour than I'd seen in months, and my mother couldn't stop smiling as she kept filling Mark's plate. I sat quietly, picking at my food and saying something only when someone talked to me directly. Not that anyone seemed to notice how quiet I was. After breakfast, Mark suggested we work on the old Chevy in the garage, a project our father had started years ago and never finished. I knew it was just an excuse to get us both out of the house, but I went with him anyway. In the garage, Mark immediately dropped the happy act. He sat on an old crate and turned to me. "You okay, Jamie? You barely said 2 words at breakfast." I picked up a wrench and turned it over in my hands, avoiding eye contact. "Just tired from training." "BS," Mark said simply. "I know that expression. It's the same one you had when Dad missed your high school graduation for that conference." I placed the wrench back on the workbench with more force than necessary. "What do you want me to say? That I'm failing? That my drill sergeant calls me Boots because I can't navigate my way out of a paper bag? That I'm a disappointment to the Walker name?" Mark didn't immediately respond. When I finally met his eyes, I saw the same intensity our father sometimes had, but without the judgment. "You're trying to be Dad," he said finally. "Or me. Or some combination of all the Walkers who came before. That's your problem." "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. "It means you're so busy trying to be someone else that you're not figuring out who you are and what you're good at." "I'm not good at anything military, apparently," I muttered. "That's not true," Mark said. "You said it yourself at dinner, you're good at the survival stuff. Dad didn't pick up on it because it's not flashy like marksmanship or hand-to-hand, but that's valuable." I shrugged, unconvinced. "Look," Mark continued, "I'm not naturally good at everything. I had to work twice as hard as some guys at certain skills, but I stopped trying to be Dad or Grandpa and started figuring out my strengths. Once I did that, the other stuff got easier too." He picked up a socket wrench and handed it to me. "Find your own way, Jamie. Stop trying to follow someone else's path." We spent the rest of the afternoon working on the Chevy, talking about everything and nothing, avoiding the topic of his upcoming deployment or my ongoing struggles. It was the most normal I'd felt since enlisting. 2 weeks later, back at Fort Benning, I got a text from Mark. "Remember what I said. Find your own way." That was it. No details about where he was going or when he'd be back. Standard procedure for classified deployments. I put my phone away and looked around the barracks. The other recruits were cleaning their rifles or polishing their boots, preparing for the next day's inspection. I had been doing the same things, trying to fit in, trying to be what I thought a Walker should be. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I needed to stop trying to be him or our father and figure out who I was. The survival instructor had praised my ability to spot edible plants and make shelter with minimal materials. Perhaps that was somewhere to start. I pulled out my notebook and began making notes on the next day's training exercise, not focusing on what I thought Staff Sergeant Reynolds wanted to see, but on what I knew I could bring to the table. I didn't know then that I would never see Mark again. Not as the brother I remembered from our father's garage. I couldn't have known that his words would mean something different in the months ahead, or that finding my own way would lead me to places no Walker had gone before. All I knew was that for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, I felt like I finally had a direction that was truly my own. 3 months into basic training, I finally found something I didn't completely suck at. While most of the other recruits grumbled through the survival exercises, I took to them naturally. "Walker's the only one who got the fire started without matches," Staff Sergeant Reynolds announced to the group during our wilderness assessment. His tone suggested he was as surprised as anyone. The other recruits glanced my way with a mix of reluctant respect and annoyance. I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to seem smug about the small victory. Later that day, Reynolds watched as I constructed a shelter using nothing but fallen branches and a tarp. "Not bad," he said, which from him counted as high praise. These moments of competence made the rest of training more bearable. I still fumbled through combat drills and looked clumsy while everyone else moved smoothly. During navigation exercises, I kept taking wrong turns that got me eye rolls from Reynolds. "Still living up to your nickname, eh, Boots?" he'd say whenever I emerged from the woods at the wrong checkpoint. I didn't mind as much anymore. Mark's advice had stuck with me: focus on what I was good at, and the rest would follow. So I doubled down on survival skills, volunteering for extra wilderness training whenever possible. It wasn't the flashy stuff my father would brag about at dinner parties, but it was mine. We were halfway through a night exercise when everything changed. I lay belly down in the mud, waiting for the signal to advance on the mock enemy position. The air smelled like wet earth and gunpowder from the blank rounds. Rain had been falling steadily all evening, soaking through my uniform. 2 instructors stood several yards away, partially hidden by a truck. They spoke in low voices, but the night was quiet enough that their words carried to where I lay. "Heard about Walker's boy?" one asked. "The one in Special Forces?" "Yeah, bad business," the other replied. "Whole unit ambushed. They're saying no survivors." "Damn shame. Kid had potential." I stopped breathing. They had to be talking about someone else. Some other Walker with a son in Special Forces. It couldn't be Mark. "Command hasn't released it publicly yet," the first instructor continued. "Found out through my buddy at Fort Bragg." Fort Bragg, where Mark was stationed. The signal flare went up, covering the field in green light. Everyone around me moved forward, but I couldn't move, my brain not wanting to accept what I'd just heard. "Walker, get your ass moving!" Reynolds shouted from somewhere to my left. I got up and followed the others, just going through motions without thought. The exercise continued around me, but I was no longer present. My mind kept replaying those words. "Whole unit ambushed. They're saying no survivors." When we returned to barracks after midnight, I immediately tried calling home. No answer at the house. My father's cell went straight to voicemail. My mother's rang and rang. I tried again every half hour until dawn. I couldn't sleep at all. With each failed attempt, I felt worse in my stomach. At 0600, I requested emergency leave from my commanding officer, explaining that I needed to contact my family about an urgent matter. He studied my face and nodded once. "Take 48 hours, Walker. I hope everything's all right." The journey to Norfolk passed in a blur. I caught a bus, then a train, watching the landscape change without seeing it. My mind kept constructing scenarios where the instructors had been wrong, where it was all a misunderstanding, where Mark was fine. When the taxi dropped me at our house, I knew immediately. The porch light was on, even though it was daylight. My mother's car sat in the driveway alongside my father's, unusual for a weekday morning. I pushed open the front door without knocking. "Mom? Dad?" My mother appeared from the kitchen, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "Oh, James," she whispered, moving toward me, her arms wrapped around me with surprising strength. "How did you know?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't explain that I'd heard it secondhand through instructors who didn't know I was listening. Instead, I just held her as she cried into my shoulder. My father was in his study, sitting stiffly at his desk. Unlike my mother, his eyes were dry, his face completely blank. In front of him was a wooden box with his medals and his father's medals. Next to it, Mark's service photo looked back at me. "Sir," I said, because I couldn't think of any other way to address him in that moment. He looked up, seemed almost surprised to see me. "James, you should be in training. I heard about Mark." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I tried calling. The phones have been busy with official calls." He gestured vaguely at the chair across from him. I sat down, waiting for him to continue. When he didn't, I asked, "What happened?" My father's jaw clenched. His unit was in classified territory. They were ambushed. Satellite images showed no survivors. Rescue teams couldn't get to the site for 3 days because enemies were still there. And Mark? No body was recovered. His voice caught slightly on the word body, the only crack in his composure. He died with honor, he added flatly. Something you might never understand. The words hurt. Even now, with Mark gone, I wasn't enough. When's the funeral? I asked, ignoring the jab. Day after tomorrow. Full military honors. My father turned back to the medals, effectively dismissing me. I found my mom in the kitchen, sorting through all the casserole dishes the neighbors had brought over. I stood next to her, quietly helping her organize all the food people always bring when someone dies. Did he say anything else to you? She asked after several minutes of silence. Just about the ambush, that there was no body. She nodded. He's been like this since the officers came. Won't talk, won't cry, just sits with those medals. She handed me a stack of plates. He loved Mark so much. The unsaid hung between us, more than he ever loved me. I spent the night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by posters of military aircraft and framed photos of my brother and me. In one, Mark stood in his dress blues at graduation, his arm around my shoulders. His smile was broad and genuine. Mine looked forced, a kid trying to fit in. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, remembering Mark's last pieces of advice to me. Find your own way. Stop trying to be someone else. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a military family. An empty casket draped in the American flag. Rows of uniformed officers standing at attention. The crack of rifles firing in salute. My father stood rigid throughout, accepting condolences with firm handshakes and minimal words. I stood beside him, mimicking his posture and expression. Though inside, I felt hollow. This ceremony, with its precise movements and scripted words, seemed insufficient for Mark, who had been so alive, so present. The folded flag was presented to my mother, who clutched it to her chest as if it contained some essence of her son. Perhaps, for her, it did. That night, I pulled the posters from my walls, jets and helicopters I'd once thought looked cool. I took down the high school track medals that Mark had helped me train for. In their place, I carefully hung Mark's awards and commendations that my father had stored in a box in his study. I didn't ask permission to take them. I knew he wouldn't notice their absence. I arranged them by date, from ROTC achievements to his Special Forces qualification badge. Each represented a milestone in becoming the soldier he'd been, the man I hadn't appreciated enough while he was alive. The next morning, I left before dawn, catching the first train back to Fort Benning. My father didn't come downstairs to see me off. My mother hugged me tightly at the door, making me promise to call more often. "Don't try to be him," she whispered, as if reading my thoughts. That's not what he would want. But she was wrong. Mark had been the best of us, the walker who lived up to the family legacy. Now that he was gone, someone had to step up. On the train, I pulled out my notebook and started planning. More hours at the range to work on my shooting, extra PT to get stronger, combat drills practiced after hours until I could do them without thinking. I would become the soldier my brother had been. I would make myself worthy of the Walker name, no matter what. Mark had told me to find my own way, but his death changed everything. Now his way was the only one that mattered. The certificate on my wall didn't feel earned. 14 months after Mark's death, I stood in my mostly empty apartment near Fort Bragg, looking at the framed proof of my Ranger qualification. I ran my fingers over my name, James Walker, printed on it, hoping it might somehow feel more like mine and less like something I'd stolen. I had made it through advanced individual training and then pushed through Ranger school out of pure stubbornness. My survival skills had gotten me enough points to make up for how average I was in tactical operations. While other rangers handled combat scenarios smoothly, I still paused too much, moving like I was following instructions instead of going with my gut. Boots has the constitution of a mountain goat, my ranger instructor had commented during the mountain phase. Can't shoot for shit, but he'll outlast everyone on limited rations. The nickname had followed me from basic training. I no longer minded it. Sometimes it felt more like me than my actual name. My apartment still looked temporary even though I'd lived there 6 months. A single couch faced a TV I barely used. The kitchen had just 4 plates, 4 glasses, and only the cookware I needed for basic meals. The bedroom was just a bed and dresser. No photos except one. Mark in his dress uniform, his smile confident and easy in a way mine never was. The knock at my door came at 0700 sharp. I opened it to find a corporal I didn't recognize holding an envelope. "Specialist Walker?" he asked, though he clearly knew who I was. "Yes." "Orders, sir. You're to report to General Harris at 0900 hours. He handed me the envelope. "Location's inside. Transportation's been arranged." The corporal left without waiting for me to answer. I closed the door and opened the envelope, finding a single sheet with just the basics: coordinates, time, and security clearance requirements. No explanation of the assignment, no duration estimate, just orders to report. I packed a small duffel with essentials, guessing more specific gear would be provided if needed. Military efficiency had become automatic for me. I could be ready to go anywhere within 15 minutes. Another habit I had picked up since Mark's death. Always ready. Always prepared. As if being prepared could somehow protect me from whatever had taken him. The coordinates led to a plain building on the southeastern edge of Fort Bragg. No signs showed what it was for. A guard checked my ID and the orders before pointing me down a hallway to a conference room. 11 other men sat around a long table when I walked in. Most had the same look, curious but professional. I didn't recognize anyone, which seemed intentional. We were all strangers pulled from different units. General Harris walked in exactly at 0900. We stood at attention until he motioned us back to our seats. "Gentlemen," he began without preamble, "what I'm about to share is classified level 4. Nothing leaves this room." He turned on a wall screen showing satellite pictures of the Arctic. The white landscape was dotted with dark spots of open water. "This is Novaya Zemlya in the Russian Arctic Circle. 14 months ago, our intelligence detected unusual activity in this region." He zoomed in on a particular section. Soviet-era submarine, Typhoon class, carrying nuclear warheads. It was thought lost in the 1980s, but recent ice melt has potentially made it accessible. He paused, looking at all of us. "Your mission is to secure the location and figure out how to get the warheads before they fall into the wrong hands. The Russians have given us limited access through the nuclear treaty, but we don't think they're telling us everything about what's going on there." I moved in my seat. This made no sense for a ranger deployment. "Sir," I said, raising my hand slightly, "isn't this more appropriate for naval special warfare or EOD teams?" Several heads turned toward me, surprised at the question. General Harris fixed me with a steady look. "Specialist Walker, right?" He didn't wait for confirmation. "We need men who can survive extreme conditions while maintaining combat readiness. The Navy will handle the actual retrieval once the area is secured. Your team provides the ground force." His explanation felt incomplete, but I nodded anyway. Questioning a general further wouldn't end well. "You deploy in 3 days. Specialized cold weather gear will be issued tomorrow. Dismissed." The briefing's abruptness left most of us exchanging confused glances as we filed out. No one spoke until we were outside. "Guess I'm canceling my weekend plans," muttered a staff sergeant to my left. "Lucky you had plans," another replied. "My wife's gonna love this mystery deployment." I went back to my apartment to get ready. The next 2 days flew by with equipment checks and cold weather training refreshers. I had my Arctic certification from Ranger School already, but I needed extra prep for the crazy cold temps in Novaya Zemlya. The transport plane took off before dawn on the 3rd day. We barely talked during the 8-hour flight, everyone quiet with their own thoughts. I kept going over Arctic survival procedures in my head, thinking about the technical stuff instead of all the unanswered questions about our mission. The plane landed on a makeshift airstrip on the ice. When the cargo door opened, the cold was so intense it shocked us even with our special gear on. Our breath turned to ice right away in the dry air. "Welcome to nowhere," someone behind me muttered. A line of snow vehicles waited to take us to the base camp. Looking through the windows, I saw nothing but flat white stretching as far as I could see, with some jagged ice formations here and there. The sky and ground mixed together in a way that made it hard to tell how far away anything was. The base had several prefab buildings secured to the ice, with equipment crates and fuel barrels around them. It looked like it was put together quickly, making me think our mission might be shorter than I'd expected. Inside the main building, the heat from big heaters hit us right away after coming in from the freezing cold. They told us to put our gear in specific spots before heading to orientation. Squad leader Rodriguez laid out a map of the area on a table in the middle of the room. "We maintain constant patrols of the perimeter," he explained, tracing routes with his finger. "2-man teams, 6-hour rotations. Primary objective is monitoring for unexpected visitors and environmental conditions." He assigned partners and schedules. I got paired with Thompson, who was quiet and had been to cold places 3 times before. "Walker, Thompson, you take the northwest quadrant. First patrol starts at Joe 600 tomorrow." Rodriguez handed us each a GPS unit. "Stick to the marked routes. Conditions change fast out there." The rest of the day was spent getting used to the base and going over safety rules. No one mentioned the submarine or nuclear warheads. We were focused on setting up security in this dangerous place. Sleep was hard to come by that night. The constant noise from the generators, plus the occasional crack and groan of the ice below us, made it tough to relax. When my alarm went off at 0500, I was already awake, looking up at the ceiling of my small room. Thompson and I got ready in silence, checking each other's gear before heading out. It was completely dark, with only our headlamps showing small circles of light as we walked. The temperature gauge showed -35 Celsius. "Third deployment to the Arctic," Thompson said as we moved away from the base. "Never gets easier." "First for me," I replied, adjusting my face covering to prevent frostbite. "Ranger school cold weather training doesn't compare. Nothing compares to this place." Thompson swept his light across the terrain. "It's not just the cold. Something about it feels off." I knew what he meant. The place wasn't just uncomfortable. It felt wrong somehow. Too still, too empty. Even in the most remote wilderness areas I'd trained in, things felt alive. But here, it was like nothing belonged. We stuck to our assigned route, stopping now and then to check our instruments and write down readings. 4 hours into the patrol, Thompson pointed to some ice about 50 meters away from our path. "Look at that structure," he said, voice muffled by his face covering. "The way the ice is growing doesn't match natural patterns." I followed his look. What I first thought were just random ice crystals actually made a pattern that was too perfect to be natural. The ice formed perfect hexagons, all connected to each other like honeycombs. "Could be pressure effects from the water underneath," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. I'd studied ice formations extensively during survival training. This wasn't in any manual. Thompson shrugged. "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced either. After documenting the coordinates, we continued our patrol. We returned to base without further incident, reporting the unusual formation to Rodriguez. He noted it without comment, which struck me as odd. Either such formations were common enough to be unremarkable, or he already knew about them. That night, I took the midnight watch shift at the perimeter of the camp. The temperature had dropped to -40, making the air feel sharp. The stars filled the black sky above, more of them visible here than I'd ever seen before. The wind stopped suddenly around 0200, leaving an odd quiet. Without the constant background noise, Every small sound seemed louder. My breathing sounded really loud in the stillness. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping that shook through the ground beneath my boots. The sound came from somewhere within the ice field, steady and pulsing. I felt it more than heard it, the shaking moving up through my legs. Thompson joined me, his face visible now that he'd pushed his covering down. "You feel that?" I asked. He nodded, looking tense in our post's dim light. "Probably ice moving," he said, but he didn't sound sure. "Happens when temperature changes make sections move." I knew enough about Arctic stuff to tell this wasn't normal ice movement. The rhythm was too steady, too measured, but I nodded anyway, taking his explanation because I didn't want to think about what else it could be. We didn't speak, while the steady thumping continued for a few minutes before it slowly stopped. We didn't bring it up again during our shift, but I saw Thompson checking his gun more often, his eyes looking around in the darkness past our light. The rhythmic beat felt familiar somehow, though I couldn't figure out why. As the sun finally started to brighten the eastern sky, I realized what it reminded me of. The marching beat from basic training. A human rhythm. A planned pattern. Something was out there in the ice. We both knew it wasn't just the cold playing tricks on us, no matter what Thompson said. 1 week into our deployment at Novaya Zemlya, the endless white landscape had started to feel like a prison. Each patrol route had become so familiar they were boring. The same ice formations, the same empty space as far as you could see. But something had changed at the base itself. I noticed it first in the communications tent. The radio operators who used to lounge between transmissions now sat straight at their stations, headsets firmly in place. Their conversation stopped whenever anyone walked in. Equipment cases I hadn't seen before showed up overnight, labeled with classification codes above my clearance level. The officers' area was busy with activity at weird hours. Twice I walked past General Harris's makeshift office after midnight to find lights still on, voices talking quietly behind the closed door. No official announcements came, but everyone could feel the tension growing. "You seen all the extra comm traffic?" I asked Thompson as we geared up for morning patrol. He nodded slightly, tightening the straps on his snow boots. "Something's up. Rodriguez has been in briefings all night." "About the submarine?" I kept my voice low. Thompson shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe they found something else out here." At 0600, we gathered for the morning briefing. Rodriguez looked tired with dark circles under his eyes. He waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "We have a situation," he began, his tone deliberately controlled. "Jones missed his check-in from the overnight patrol. Last communication was at 0200 hours, a routine status report from the Eastern Quadrant. No distress signal, no indication of problems." The room went silent. Missing personnel in Arctic conditions meant a narrow survival window. Davis, his patrol partner, returned to base at 500 as scheduled, assuming Jones had already checked in. They had split up to cover more ground, a direct violation of protocol. Davis looked down at his hands, jaw tight. "Command has authorized full search operations. We'll divide into teams and cover Jones's last known route plus a 2-mile radius." Rodriguez pointed to a map on the wall where a red X marked Jones's last reported position. "Standard search pattern, check in every 15 minutes. If weather turns, return immediately to base. Questions?" No one spoke. We all understood the gravity of the situation. In these temperatures, even with proper gear, Jones had hours at most. Rodriguez paired us off. I was with Thompson again, assigned to the northeastern sector where Jones's last transmission originated. We geared up quickly, taking extra emergency supplies and signal flares. Outside, the sky had cleared overnight, creating dangerously cold conditions. The temperature readout showed -42 Celsius. Our breath froze instantly, creating small ice crystals on our face coverings. "You take point," Thompson said as we left the perimeter. "You're better at tracking." I nodded, eyes already looking over the snow for any sign of someone passing through. Fresh snowfall overnight had covered most of the ground. but the wind had made patches where older tracks might still be visible. We walked in silence for nearly an hour before I spotted the first sign, a partial boot print tucked away next to a chunk of ice. The tread pattern matched our standard issue. "Got something," I called to Thompson, who moved up beside me. I knelt to look at the print. Heading east, matches his patrol route. We followed the direction, finding hints he'd been there. A messed up snowdrift, another partial footprint, a spot where someone had clearly stopped to take readings from how the tracks were bunched together. 2 miles from the base, we found a better trail. The wind had blown this area clean after Jones walked through, leaving his tracks easy to see. He was moving normally, Thompson observed. No signs of distress or hurry. The tracks kept going straight for about a quarter mile before making a sharp right turn, breaking away from the normal patrol route. Why would he go this way? I wondered aloud, following the new direction. Thompson checked his GPS. Nothing of interest marked in this sector. We continued following the trail, which remained consistent, evenly spaced footprints showing a normal walking pace. No signs of staggering, running, or defensive positioning. Then the tracks simply ended. I stopped so suddenly that Thompson bumped into me from behind. Right in front of us was a perfect circle cut into the ice, about 6 feet across. Jones's footprints led right to the edge and disappeared. "What the hell?" Thompson whispered, moving cautiously forward. We approached the edge together, weapons ready. The hole cut clean through the ice sheet, revealing dark water below. Its edges weren't rough or cracked as they would be from a natural break or from someone falling through. They were perfectly smooth, as if cut by precision tools. "This isn't possible," Thompson said, running a gloved hand along the edge. "Ice doesn't break like this." I knelt to examine the area around the hole. No blood. No signs of struggle. No equipment scattered around as there would be if Jones had fallen unexpectedly. Just footprints leading to the edge, and then nothing. "Thompson to base," he called into his radio. "We've located Jones's tracks. You're not going to believe this." While Thompson reported our find, I circled the hole, searching for any additional clues. The snow around it was undisturbed except for Jones's approach. No other tracks led to or from the site. "Rodriguez is sending a team with ice analysis equipment," Thompson said after signing off. "We're to secure the area until they arrive." I nodded, still circling the hole, unable to shake the feeling that I was missing something important. "It's like he just disappeared." "People don't disappear," Thompson replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We set up a temporary perimeter, placing markers to prevent anyone from accidentally approaching the edge. The hole seemed to absorb light, the water below so dark it appeared solid. Davis arrived with the technical team 30 minutes later. His face went pale when he saw the hole. "He fell through," Davis said immediately. "Has to be. The ice must have given way." The lead technician, a man I didn't recognize, came over with what looked like ground-penetrating radar. "Ice doesn't break in perfect circles," he said, setting up his equipment. "Not naturally." "So what are you saying?" Davis demanded. "Someone cut through 6 feet of solid ice without making a sound or leaving traces, in the middle of nowhere?" No one answered him. The technician started checking the hole and the area around it, looking more confused every time he checked his readings. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "According to these readings, this hole goes down at least 300 feet, and the walls are perfectly vertical all the way down. That's not possible with current technology, not in these conditions." Davis backed away from the edge, looking pretty shaken. "So what happened to Jones?" The technician shook his head. "I don't know, but I can tell you this isn't something natural, and it wasn't made by any of our equipment." The search went on for 3 days. We found 6 more holes across the area, all looking the same as the first one, 6 feet wide, perfectly round, with edges smoother than they should be. We didn't find any sign of Jones or his stuff. On the 4th morning, Rodriguez got the squad together. Command has officially listed Jones as missing in action. They're cutting back the search to just regular patrols. His voice made it clear he didn't agree with the decision. I know this is tough. Jones was one of us, but we still have a job to do. That night, I sat by myself in the small communications tent, typing up the day's readings. The base had gotten a lot quieter since Jones went missing. People talked in whispers now. Nobody walked around alone outside the camp anymore. I was just about to finish my report when I heard it. Quiet, but definitely there. James. I froze. My fingers stopped right above the keyboard. The voice came from outside, kind of far but clear enough that I heard my name. A voice I recognized right away. Mark's voice. Impossible, I whispered to myself, but I was already moving, grabbing my parka and rushing outside. The night air was freezing cold and hurt to breathe. I looked around in the darkness beyond the base perimeter, seeing nothing but the empty ice field lit up by the moon. "Mark!" I called, my voice swallowed by the vastness. "Problem, Walker?" Thompson appeared beside me, zipping up his own parka. I turned to him, suddenly aware of how I must look, standing outside without proper gear, calling my dead brother's name into the Arctic night. "I thought I heard something," I said, trying to sound casual. "Probably just the wind." Thompson looked at my face. "You know, my first Arctic deployment, I started hearing things too. My girlfriend's voice calling from the ice fields. The isolation and cold can mess with your head." "I know." I nodded, grateful for the explanation. Stress-induced hallucinations are common in extreme environments. It's in the training manual. "Exactly." Thompson seemed relieved I wasn't arguing. "Get some rest, Walker. You've been pushing too hard since Jones disappeared." I let him think he'd convinced me, going back to my tent and lying on my cot with all my clothes still on. I couldn't sleep. I knew what stress hallucinations felt like. The vague impressions, the weird sounds that went away when you tried to focus on them. This had been different, clear, distinct, real. The next night, I volunteered for the midnight perimeter check, wanting to be outside, alone in the quiet darkness. It was even colder now, and I felt the biting cold as I walked around. That's when I heard it again. Stronger this time, coming from somewhere beyond the eastern perimeter. "They're lying to you, Jamie, and to you. My childhood nickname, one only Mark had ever used." The voice sounded clear in the quiet night air. No way I could mistake it for wind or my imagination. I held onto the perimeter fence, looking into the darkness where the voice came from. I wanted to wake Rodriguez, tell him what I'd heard, follow the rules. Instead, I chose differently. Mark was out there somehow, or something that sounded just like him. Either way, I needed answers more than I needed to follow rules. I made note of where the voice came from, picking out things I could see in the moonlight. A weird ice shape to the east, a small bump in the flat ground. I'd find a way to check it out alone, away from the official patrols and cameras. As I finished my rounds and headed back to the main building, I knew I was breaking the rules. Something strange was happening in this frozen place that had nothing to do with missing submarines or Cold War stuff. The perfect round holes, the voice of my dead brother. None of it made sense. But I was going to find answers even if I had to disobey orders. Even if I had to face whatever was under the ice. Whatever took Jones. The voice had said they were lying to us. After a week of quiet talks and secret equipment, I believed it. Now I needed to know what the truth was, and if I could handle it. The voice stuck with me in my dreams that night. Mark's words kept playing in my head long after my shift was done. "They're lying to you." The same line over and over until I finally fell into a broken sleep. I got up before my alarm, my mind already racing with ideas. I needed to check things out by myself, away from everyone watching at the base. My training had taught me how to move through tough environments without being seen. I just needed to find the right chance. It happened faster than I thought. Rodriguez announced new patrol schedules that left me with 3 hours free the next afternoon. As soon as he let us go, I started planning in my head, figuring out how far I could go and still get back before anyone noticed I was gone. My first secret trip was careful, just a mile past our normal patrol routes. I walked quickly across the ice, using the weird ice shapes as markers so I could find my way back. It was freezing cold even with all my layers, but I kept going, pulled by something I couldn't really explain. I didn't see anything special until I was almost ready to head back. That's when I saw it. Ice crystals growing in a pattern that made me stop. They weren't random like normal ice. These crystals made perfect six-sided shapes connected in a grid. I got down to look at them closer, touching the super sharp edges with my glove. The pattern went on for about 20 feet, like something under the ice had made it grow that way. I took pictures with my phone before heading back, getting to the base just as my next shift started. Nobody asked where I'd been. After that first trip went so well, the next ones were easier. Every chance I got, a long break, finishing patrol early, swapping shifts with Thompson. I snuck away to look around farther from base. Each time I found more weird ice shapes. The patterns got more complex the farther out I went, looking more like buildings than anything natural. 2 weeks into these secret trips, I found something really weird. 5 miles northeast of the base, I found a line of holes in the ice, just like the one where Jones disappeared. 6 round holes with super smooth edges, all in a straight line across the ice. I looked where they pointed and saw a ridge rising up from the flat horizon. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything with notes and drawings. I hid it in a waterproof bag tucked in my emergency gear where nobody would look. Part of me knew I should report what I found, but another part, the part that heard Mark's voice, knew I needed more proof before anyone would believe me. The weirdest thing happened during my 3rd week of exploring. I was looking at another crystal pattern when I checked my watch to see how much time I had left. The second hand was moving backwards. I stared at it, thinking I was seeing things, but then the minute hand started going backwards too, like time was running in reverse. I checked my phone, dead, even though it was fully charged when I left. When I got back to base, my watch fixed itself, showing the same time as the clock in the operations room. I tested this weird thing several times on later trips. Each time I went about 3 miles from base, my watch started running backwards. It got more noticeable the farther out I went, but time was totally normal when I got back to base. It was like those areas had their own weird time zone. All these secret trips started to wear me down. I got dark circles under my eyes. My hands got a little shaky during morning meetings. Food started tasting like nothing as I got more and more tired. Rodriguez pulled me aside after a really rough morning when I almost fell asleep during the briefing. "Walker, you look like shit," he said, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face. "Medical says your last check-in showed elevated blood pressure and signs of sleep deprivation." "Just having trouble adjusting to the constant light," I lied. The Arctic summer meant 24 hours of daylight, which did mess with most people's sleep cycles initially. "I'll get it under control." Rodriguez didn't look convinced. "Maybe I should pull you from patrols for a few days, let you get some rest." I felt a flash of panic. Without patrol duties, my opportunities to explore would vanish. "That's not necessary, sir. Actually, I'd like to volunteer for some extra duties. The communication tent needs help cataloging weather data. I can handle it." "More work is your solution to exhaustion?" His eyebrow raised. "Keeping busy helps me sleep better," I said, which wasn't entirely false. Physical exhaustion sometimes pushed back the nightmares that had plagued me since arriving. He studied me for another moment before nodding reluctantly. "Fine. But if your next medical shows the same issues, I'm ordering mandatory rest. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." The extra duties actually provided better cover for my explorations. The increased trust gave me more freedom to move around the base without question, and access to the communication logs helped me identify the best times to slip away unnoticed. 3 days later, I was on an official patrol with Thompson and Davis when we made an unexpected discovery. Our route took us to a previously unexplored section of the eastern quadrant, where moved ice had revealed equipment partially buried in the snow. Soviet gear, Thompson said, kneeling beside what looked like a sled runner. Old school. We dug further and found a stash of supplies kept good by the cold. Tools, cooking equipment, science stuff, and best of all, a waterproof case with journals inside. The Russian writing and red stars on the equipment backed up what Thompson said. This stuff came from a Soviet expedition. Check the dates, I said, brushing ice from one of the journal covers. 1983, Thompson read, flipping through the pages. Can't read much else without a translator. Davis picked up one of the journals and looked at it doubtfully. Probably just another failed scientific mission. The Soviets lost dozens of teams up here during the Cold War. I looked over his shoulder as he turned the pages, and I felt sick right away. Mixed in with the Russian text were detailed drawings, sketches of creatures with weird, bendy limbs and extra joints. One drawing showed hands with too many fingers, including what looked like double thumbs. The artist had drawn them coming out of round holes in the ice, just like the ones where Jones had disappeared. "What the hell is this?" Davis muttered, turning to another page filled with similar drawings. "Cabin fever hallucinations," Thompson suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "These guys were probably stuck out here too long, started seeing things." "Maybe," Davis said, closing the journal quickly as if uncomfortable with its contents. "Or maybe they were just shitty artists." I said nothing, but I got really scared when I recognized the creatures. They looked exactly like the figures in my dreams since coming to Novaya Zemlya. Long, thin limbs bent at weird angles, too many joints, hands with extra fingers. I thought they were just stress dreams from Jones going missing and those strange holes in the ice. Now I wasn't so sure. We got the journals and equipment to take back to base. General Harris immediately classified everything, bringing in someone who knew Russian to translate the text. The journals went into the restricted area of the command center, and we got strict orders not to tell anyone about what we'd found. That night was the coldest since we got here. The temperature dropped to -55 Celsius, so cold even the generators had trouble, their usual steady noise stopping now and then. I had the midnight watch shift, standing alone at the eastern edge, with cold so intense it felt like tiny needles sticking into any bare skin. The base had gotten quieter since Jones disappeared. Not many people went outside unless they had to. Everyone talked quietly. Nobody seemed to remember why we came here originally. Something about a lost submarine with nuclear warheads. Instead, everyone felt nervous, but nobody wanted to talk about it. As I looked around in the darkness past the perimeter lights, I heard the voice again. It was clearer than ever before, coming from the direction of that distant ridge I'd noticed days earlier. "Find me before they do, Jamie." It wasn't an echo or the wind playing tricks. It was my brother's voice calling me by the nickname only he used, clear as day across the frozen wasteland. I held onto the railing, looking toward where the sound came from. I could barely see the ridge in the moonlight. It would take at least a day to walk there. Going meant leaving my post, breaking orders, and risking a court-martial or worse. But Mark was out there. Or something that sounded just like him. Either way, I needed answers more than I needed to follow the rules. The Soviet journals, the weird ice formations, the holes lined up perfectly pointing to that ridge. It all had to be connected. I made up my mind while finishing my watch and heading back to my room. Tomorrow I'd follow the voice no matter what happened. I'd find what was waiting for me on that ridge, even if it meant not coming back to base. As I lay on my cot, looking at the ceiling, I felt the seriousness of my decision. Part of me thought this might be exactly what happened to Jones, following blindly into a trap. But another part of me, the part that grew up in Mark's shadow and couldn't save him, knew I had no choice. Tomorrow, I'd find out the truth, whatever it was. I left base camp at 0700, clipboard in hand, acting as bored as someone checking weather stations should look. Rodriguez didn't ask many questions when I volunteered. Nobody wanted weather station duty because it was so boring. When Thompson asked why I suddenly cared about weather equipment, I just shrugged. Data from Station 3 looks off. Figured I'd recalibrate it myself. "Just watch yourself out there," Thompson said, zipping his parka against the cold. "They found another one of those holes last night, closer to base than ever before." "Where?" I kept my voice level despite my racing pulse. "Northeast quadrant, barely a mile out. Same as the others. Perfect circle cut through solid ice." I nodded, pretending this was routine information rather than confirmation of my worst fears. "I'll keep my eyes open." The guards at the north gate logged my departure as I passed through. I headed toward Weather Station 3 until I was sure I'd gone out of view, then changed direction. I started making my way to the distant ridge where Mark's voice had come from. The temperature dropped really fast as I got farther from base. My digital thermometer showed -52 when I left, but now it was around -63. It was way too extreme and sudden. The weather around here just didn't make sense. 2 hours into my trip, I realized there were no signs of people anywhere. The snow was completely empty in every direction, just white snow with no footprints or tracks from equipment. I kept checking my GPS, marking my way back to base while following my path to the ridge. "Jamie." The voice cut through the silence, closer now than ever before. I stopped, looking around the empty landscape. "Mark? This way." His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. I moved faster, the voice pulling me forward. The ridge got bigger as I got closer. Not a natural formation like I first thought, but something made by forces I couldn't figure out. Parts of it stuck up in straight angles, with weird patterns visible under the snow and ice. The voice got louder as I reached the bottom of the ridge. "Down here." I walked along the edge until the ground suddenly vanished beneath my feet. I caught myself just in time, sliding to a stop at the edge of a huge crack cutting deep into the ice. It went down at least 50 feet with walls smooth as glass, showing a blue glow from below. I spotted something moving, a person on a narrow ledge below, holding onto the ice wall about halfway down. The person looked up. I froze. Even from here, I knew that face right away. Mark. My brother was staring back at me from the shadows below. Without thinking twice, I dropped my pack and pulled out my emergency climbing gear. My hands worked on their own, setting up the rope and checking it twice before putting on my harness. I knew this made no sense. Mark had died 3 years ago with everyone in his unit, but I was seeing him with my own eyes. Going down was really tough. The walls were much slicker than they looked, and my boots kept slipping. It got way colder as I lowered myself deeper, even with my special Arctic clothes. As I got closer to where Mark waited, I could see him better. His military jacket was all torn up. He didn't move at all, except for his head following me as I came down. Something about the way he was standing seemed off, though I couldn't tell exactly what from where I was. "Mark," I called as I reached his level, securing myself on the narrow ledge. "How did you survive? What happened to your unit?" My brother turned fully toward me, and I couldn't breathe. His hands gripped the ice with crazy strength, hands that each had 2 perfectly formed extra thumbs. His limbs bent at angles no human joints should bend, with too many parts between shoulder and wrist, between hip and ankle. But his face was what broke me. Mark's eyes and mouth had been roughly sewn shut with thick black thread that looked like fishing line, the stitches pulling his skin into weird shapes. Yet somehow, impossibly, his voice reached me. "Not much time. They're coming." His lips didn't move under the stitches. The sound didn't travel through air. His voice just appeared in my head, as clear as if he stood next to me on a sunny day. "What happened to you?" I managed to ask, helping him shift position on the ice ledge. His body moved like a marionette with extra joints, bending in ways that made my stomach turn. "They found me after the ambush," Mark said without speaking, "what was left of me. They need templates, human forms to study, but they don't understand." Not completely. I tried to understand what he said while feeling shocked and scared. "Who are they? What do you mean, templates?" Before he could answer, the ice under us shook. A low buzz ran through the shelf, getting stronger every second. Mark looked up suddenly, and I could tell he was trying to warn us, even with his sewn eyes. "They know you're here now," he said. "They've been waiting." The shaking got worse. Ice bits rained down on us as something huge moved under where we stood. The shelf broke, with cracks spreading out from right under our feet. "We need to go," I said, reaching for my brother. "Can you climb? I'll help you." "Too late." Mark's voice cut through my mind. "They used me as bait." The ice shelf broke apart. Through the burst of ice chunks, something shot up from below, a real-life nightmare. The thing unfolded from the water, a mess of twisted limbs and too many eyes. Its body made no sense, kinda human-shaped in the middle, but with arms and legs sticking out everywhere. Each limb bent weirdly and ended in hands with different numbers of fingers. Eyes covered its whole body, all blinking on their own. Its skin looked clear like ice, but moved like it was alive. Mark stepped between me and the monster, moving super fast. His misshapen body got ready for a fight. "Run, Jamie," he commanded without speaking. "Get to the rope. I'll hold it off." "I can't leave you," I protested, though every cell in my body screamed at me to flee. "I'm already gone," Mark said, profound sadness somehow conveyed without facial expression. "Have been for years. This isn't living." The creature moved forward, its movements smooth even with its weird body shape. Mark threw himself at it with inhuman strength, wrestling with its many arms. "Run!" His mental voice struck like a physical blow. "They used me as bait." I finally snapped out of my shock and ran to the climbing rope, grabbing it with both hands. Behind me, Mark and the creature were fighting, tangled up together with way too many limbs. I started climbing, pulling myself up hand over hand, my muscles burning. Below me, more ice cracked. The fighting sounds changed to wet, slithering noises as more creatures came out from the ice. I climbed faster, with a panic that made me stronger than I thought I was. When I got near the top, I looked down. What I saw below was horrible. Several creatures now filled the crack in the ice where Mark and I had been standing. My brother was still fighting, his strange body somehow holding up against these things, but they had him surrounded. As I watched, he turned his stitched-up face toward me, somehow finding me even though his eyes were sewn shut. "Salt water," his voice said in my mind. "It's in our blood, Jamie. Always has been." I didn't understand his words, but had no time to question them. I pulled myself over the edge onto solid ground, falling down for a second as I caught my breath. The ice beneath me shook. They were coming. I grabbed my gear in a panic, leaving behind stuff I didn't absolutely need. Whatever scary thing was in that ice crack was spreading. I needed to warn the base. I ran. The clean snow that looked so pretty hours earlier now seemed to work against me, making it harder to move as I pushed myself to keep going. Behind me, I heard ice breaking as more creatures came out. The way they moved made horrible sounds, clicking joints, sliding bodies, and breathing that was too even, too machine-like. The ridge got smaller behind me as I ran, my lungs hurting in the cold. My thoughts jumped all over. Mark's torn-up body, the creatures coming out of the ice, the warning about salt water and blood. Nothing made sense, but it all seemed really important. After what felt like hours, I could see the base in the distance. I felt relieved until I saw something was wrong. The lights around the edge were flashing red. That was the signal to get out. As I got closer to the fence, alarms went off across the compound. People rushed between buildings, loading stuff onto vehicles. They were already evacuating. I reached the edge of the base just as Rodriguez came out of the command center, shouting orders to some soldiers. He saw me and looked completely shocked. "Walker, where the hell have you been?" he demanded as I staggered through the gate. "Weather Station 6 reported you never arrived." I opened my mouth to explain, to warn him about what I'd seen, but before I could speak, a new alarm blared. Higher pitched, more urgent than the evacuation signal. Rodriguez's radio buzzed. "Perimeter breach in sectors 7 through 9. Multiple unidentified contacts approaching from the northeast." He looked at me, then in the direction I had come from. I could see it click in his face as he put it together, his expression quickly turning to anger and fear. "What did you do, Walker?" he asked quietly. "What did you find out there?" But there was no time to answer. The creatures were coming, and they were coming fast. Rodriguez's question hung in the air as the alarms blared across the base. I never got to answer him. A massive explosion shook the eastern outer fence, throwing us both to the ground. Through the smoke and confusion, I caught quick looks at impossible shapes. Too many limbs moving too quickly, figures that bent in ways no human could. The next hours passed in bits and pieces. Gunfire, screams, the sound of helicopters arriving too late. Someone dragged me onto an aircraft. My last sight of Novaya Zemlya was flames burning our base against the endless white. That was 3 years ago. For weeks after the evacuation, I sat in windowless rooms at military bases while men in different uniforms asked the same questions over and over. What did I see on the ice? Why did I leave base without permission? What did I find at the ridge? When I told them about Mark with his sewn eyes and weird joints and the creatures that came out from under the ice, their faces never changed. They just made notes and called in the psychiatrists. Post-traumatic stress, one doctor explained in a practiced voice. Your mind created a narrative to process the trauma of losing your brother years ago, combined with the stress of witnessing your squad members die in the methane pocket explosion. Explosion? I asked. There was no explosion. There were creatures. 17 personnel died when a previously unknown methane pocket beneath the ice ignited. He interrupted, pushing a paper across the table. Here's the official report. Your entire squad, including Rodriguez and Thompson, were killed. You're lucky to have survived. They upped my medication after that. The pills made everything foggy, far away. When I kept talking about what I'd seen, they just added more pills. I learned to stay quiet pretty quick and just nod along with their version of things. It was the only way to get out. They gave me an honorable discharge with a confidentiality agreement that would land me in serious trouble if I broke it. The disability money wasn't charity. It was to keep me quiet. We all knew it, though nobody said it out loud. I moved to Montana after getting out, taking a job teaching wilderness survival at an outdoor center near Glacier National Park. The work was perfect for me. Long stretches alone in the backcountry, not much talking to people. My students came for 2-week courses, then left, so no one stuck around long enough to notice my habits. How I tested water for salt, refused to swim, or took pictures of weird ice formations. Being on my own gave me space to handle my paranoia without the meds. I kept looking for answers, spending nights going through old military records and geology reports about Arctic regions. I collected similar stories spanning decades, people vanishing near Arctic research stations, Soviet teams that disappeared completely, Norwegian fishermen who reported seeing things under the ice that shouldn't exist. I was marking points on a map when I got the call about my dad. Heart attack, the family lawyer explained. Very sudden. He was at his desk at home. I hadn't spoken to my father since before Novaya Zemlya. After my discharge, I'd tried calling once. He'd answered with that military precision in his voice. I heard about your discharge, he'd said. Medical reasons? They're claiming? Something like that, I'd replied. The silence went on until he finally said, You always were the weaker one. Then he hung up. 3 days after the lawyer's call, I went back to Norfolk. The house seemed smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to Montana's open spaces. My mother had died 2 years earlier from breast cancer. I didn't go to the funeral. My father made it clear I wasn't welcome. The lawyer gave me papers to sign, explained the will, everything left to me as the only surviving son, and handed me keys to the house. When he left, I stood in the quiet living room. Military photos of men in uniform hung on the walls. Great-grandfather, grandfather, father, Mark. My own photo wasn't there. I spent that first night going through my father's desk. His military paperwork was all neatly organized. Service records, commendations, insurance policies. Nothing personal, nothing that showed who he really was. My father, strict to the end. It took 3 days to look through the main floor and my father's bedroom. I found nothing unusual, just the stuff of a lifelong military man whose personality had been put away like his service records. On the 4th day, I went up to the attic. The pull-down ladder squeaked under my weight. Dust floated in the air, visible in the weak light from a single bulb that turned on with a pull string. Cardboard boxes and old furniture lined the walls. In the corner sat something that caught my eye right away, a military footlocker with Walker H.J. stenciled on the side. My grandfather, Harold James Walker. The footlocker wasn't locked, though the hinges squeaked when I opened the lid. Inside were the things I expected, an old uniform with W-2 service patches, medals in display cases, old photographs of young men in fatigues. Under these I found a leather-bound journal with what looked like daily entries from his service years. As I flipped through the old pages, a smaller metal box caught my eye at the bottom of the locker. Unlike the footlocker itself, this box was secured with a combination lock. I tried several obvious combinations, my grandfather's birth date, service numbers, anniversary, before I realized the lock's digits matched the numbers on one of his service medals. The box opened with a soft click. Inside was a stack of papers, old and thin. On top was a photograph I first thought was a family portrait until I looked closer. It showed my father as a young boy, about 10 years old, standing between my grandparents. Next to them stood a man I'd never seen before, tall, with my father's jawline and my grandfather's eyes. He looked just like our family, but it was his hands that shocked me. Clearly visible as he put one arm around my young father's shoulders were hands with 2 perfectly formed opposable thumbs each. I turned the photo over. Written in faded ink: William, Martha, Harold, and Robert. Christmas 1947. Robert, an uncle I'd never heard mentioned in all my years. Looking deeper into the box, I found medical records from the Naval Psychiatric Research Hospital in Bethesda. Patient, Robert Walker. Admitted, January 1953. Reason for commitment: acute psychosis following participation in classified Operation Icebridge. The intake notes described severe physical anomalies and violent episodes triggered by immersion in saline solutions. My hands shook as I kept reading. The medical reports documented progressive physical alterations they saw during Robert's confinement. Notes from 1955 mentioned additional joint development in extremities and unusual epidermal changes. The final entry, dated 1957, simply stated, "Patient deceased following escaped containment and immersion in saltwater basin." Under these records was a handwritten letter, the paper now yellow and thin. I recognized my grandfather's handwriting from his journal. "My dearest Martha, the doctors assure me William doesn't carry the gene, but I've seen how he changes when angry. The water glass incident last week when his fingers got longer, he didn't notice, but I did. We must never let the boys near salt water." Robert's condition began after his Arctic deployment when salt water triggered something dormant in his system. I've arranged for William's entry into officer training upon graduation. The family tradition excuse works well enough. Military service isn't just duty, it's containment. Remember that if I'm not here to ensure it happens. With all my love, Harold. I set the letter down, thinking back through memories that now made sense. My father's pushing for military careers for his sons, his anger when Mark briefly thought about college instead of the academy, the weird family rule against ocean swimming even though we lived in Norfolk. Mark's advice to find my own way now had a completely different meaning. My family had been pushing military service for generations, not from patriotism, but from fear, keeping their bloodline within controlled environments, keeping us from whatever triggered the changes they knew were possible. "Salt water," Mark had said in that ice crevasse. "It's in our blood, Jamie." I looked at my hands in the dim attic light, moving my fingers. Normal 5-finger hands with no signs of change. But then, I'd always followed the family rules without being told. No swimming in the ocean, no Navy service. I chose the Army because it made my father happy, never knowing he'd pushed me there to keep me from the sea. Until Novaya Zemlya, until the ice, until whatever was hiding in my blood woke up. I carefully put everything back in the metal box except for Robert's photo, which I slipped into my pocket. Then I closed the footlocker, went down the attic stairs, and headed to my father's study. The maps I'd found earlier showed where he'd served. All on land, I now noticed. He'd stayed away from water assignments his whole career. On his desk sat a glass with bourbon he wouldn't finish. I picked it up, looked at the drink, then set it down without drinking. Next to it was a letter from the VA about my disability pay, sent to him for some reason. He'd written one word across it: shameful. He died never knowing what I'd seen on the ice, never knowing I'd found the family secret he'd spent his life hiding from. I now got why my family had always been so closed off. They weren't just following military tradition, they were trying to control something inside themselves, afraid of what they might become if they lost it. As night fell over the quiet house, I sat in my father's chair, thinking about all the secrets and fear, finally understanding why I'd always been pushed to be like the men before me.